Hello and welcome to today's NEASC Virtual Global Forum, Reopening Schools in New England, a conversation with state representatives. I'm Cam Staples, president of NEASC. Working with me today is Allison Geary, the deputy director of the NEASC Commission on Public Schools. We thank you, educators from across the country and around the world, for joining us today. We are pleased to welcome over 2,000 attendees from around the world. Today you will hear from representatives from 5 of the 6 New England states about the strategies and processes that have gone into developing guidelines for reopening schools in the fall and what support will be offered to schools during this difficult transition. Unfortunately, the Agency of Education in Vermont did not respond to our request to join the webinar, but we will be posting resources in the chat that have been released about the Vermont reopening plan. Today's NEASC Forum, like all our past webinars, will be recorded and made available on the NEASC website, along with any resources provided during the broadcast. We have created the hashtag NEASC Forum and encourage you to use it when posting about today's forum on social media. For today's webinar, we have turned on the Zoom chat and the Q&A features. Please use chat to send general messages to other attendees. You can use the Q&A to submit questions for the panelists. Click on the thumbs up icon next to a posted question to show your interest and bring our attention to a question. Thank you very much to all of you who've submitted questions with your registration. They were very helpful in planning this webinar. 1 hour won't give us enough time to get everyone's questions, but we'll do our best to include a few before the end of our session today. Now I'd like to pass the conversation over to my co-host, Allison, who will start the introductions. Allison?
Thank you, Cam. We are really grateful to have our panelists with us today to talk a bit about their state's reopening plans. We know that not all the plans have been published yet, but we're hoping to get some understanding about the process each state is going through and the timeline for communicating their guidance to schools. I'd now like to ask each of our panelists to introduce themselves very briefly before we dive into the questions that we would like to start today. Let's start with Desi Nesmith, Deputy Commissioner of the Connecticut State Department of Education.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for inviting me to attend. My name is Desi Nesmith. I'm the Deputy Commissioner of Academics and Innovation at the Connecticut State Department of Education.
Great, thank you, Desi. Next, we have Daniel Schuta, the Deputy Commissioner of the Maine Department of Education.
Good morning, everyone. Greetings from Maine. Happy to be joining the conversation this morning. I'm coming to you live from my remote Department of Education in my basement, where I've been for quite a while here. So good morning, everybody. Happy to join the conversation.
Excellent, thank you. Next, we have Bob Baldwin, who is the Superintendent of the Fairhaven Public Schools, but also the incoming President of the Massachusetts Superintendents Association.
Good morning, everyone. It's nice to be here and representing our Commonwealth. I'll be using the lens from the field today to try to help support everyone in how to navigate this process.
Thanks, Bob. Next, we have Commissioner Frank Edelblue from the New Hampshire Department of Education.
Good morning, everyone. Pleasure to join you, and I look forward to our conversation this morning.
Thank you. And lastly, Kristen Danusis, who's the Project Manager for the Reentry Schools Task Force in the Rhode Island Department of Education.
Good morning, everyone. I'm an education specialist at the Rhode Island Department of Education with a focus on supporting leaders across the state, and I look forward to talking with everyone this morning. Thank you.
Thank you. And again, thanks to all of you for being here. We know how busy you are, and we're really grateful that you made the time to speak to all of our participants today. So let's start just with our opening question. What process is your state using to determine guidelines for schools opening in the fall? And what's your timeline for releasing state guidance? Desi, why don't we start with you, and we'll sort of go in that same order. So Desi, then Dan, Bob, Frank, and Kristen.
Thanks, Allison. So part of our process from a while back when this first started, our commissioner chaired a subcommittee for reopening Connecticut education. And through that, we were able to do a number of different feedback opportunities. We've had parents, we've had students, we've had community members, educators, superintendents, principals, a lot of input around what recommendations people have for reopening and frankly, what concerns they have. And there are many, obviously, dealing with a pandemic like this. And so we've been able to take all of that feedback and assemble our writing team, which is what we're, that's the stage that we're at right now, is currently drafting some information, a plan to share with our governor here in Connecticut. And so we spent a lot of time, I would say, the last 2 months, just getting a lot of feedback, a lot of stakeholder input, and really what are people's concerns, what's on their mind the most, what is it that they want us to hear from them. In Connecticut, we have regional education service centers known as RESCs. So our state is split up into 6 sort of different sections. And we asked each RESC to put together a regional advisory team so that we are making sure that we're getting feedback from across the state, because the virus has affected our state very differently. So Fairfield County was somewhat of a hot spot when all this started, but Windham County has had very few cases. And so we knew that the reopening piece, we wanted to hear from different folks who are being affected differently, because it doesn't look the same across Connecticut in terms of the impact that the virus has had. So we've done a lot of stakeholder feedback. We spent a lot of time looking at other state plans and working with CCSSO. And now we're at the point where we're currently drafting some information and a plan to be shared with our governor. As far as a timeline, I think we'll be ready to share something with our governor in the next week or so.
Terrific, thank you. Dan?
I hear lots of similarities with Desi's approach. So we too convened a large group. There were roughly 45 members of a stakeholder group. They represented our major organizations from across the state. And we worked together to put a draft together that would address a number of the topics that we were hearing from our school units across the state that was going to be important for them to know and understand to be prepared for the fall. We continue to refer to it as returning to classroom. We've tried not to use the words closing and reopening, because we know that there was a lot that was still going on since March. I find it kind of interesting that we're June 16th, and for us, March 16th was really the first day that was unlike many others prior to that. So that group worked quite a bit. Again, worked with other organizations across the country, CCSSO included, as well as I know that our commissioner was in touch with many of the other New England commissioners and commissioners across the country. We too looked at many different plans as different states were opening up those plans, and including other countries as well that had gone through it. We also wanted to make sure that folks had some understanding of what the decision-making process would be for when it would be safe to return. And so our plan includes really a two-pronged approach. It's based heavily on the health and public health benchmarks that are present, and also a school's readiness to be open for safety and health of both the staff and the students. So those two pieces work together. We'll work collaboratively with our school units to make those decisions, along with our emergency management agency in our state, as well as our CDC in our state. Because that was really the biggest question that we kept hearing, was who's going to make the decision about when it would be safe to return. And so the answer to that is that it'll be a partnership with our school units. We don't have authority to either open or close a single school unit. It's really a local authority, as I'm sure many of you other states are. We're a proud local control state, but it's a local control with the support from the state agency. So we're happy to do that. We have already released a first iteration of our draft. It's on our website. We've had a COVID-19 page, as I'm sure other states have as well. If people are interested in looking at our draft, it's a link right in the top left-hand corner of our COVID-19 page. We really are thinking about it as our first draft. We know that we'll receive further information as the months proceed here, as we get closer to what we hope will be a return to classroom instruction. That's really what we're striving for. But we'll keep an eye on things and see how things progress. Currently, we have only 13 of our 16 counties that do not have community transmission, which is a good thing for those 13 communities, but 3 that do. So it will look potentially different across the state. when the time comes to return, it's a possibility that there will be differences across the state, so we're preparing for that. As I'm sure many of the other states have done, we're thinking about a whole host of different scenarios from, everything's still remote like we've done, but now we've had some time to plan, so it'll probably look a little bit different, to a hybrid approach where maybe some kids are at home if they're at higher risk, some staff are at home if they're at higher risk, but some people are back in the building to everyone's back at some point, which is really what we're looking forward to at some point. So that draft is out. We are also going to be putting out a survey to collect feedback from the really the community, the state community, anyone who is interested in providing us feedback, and we'll continue to update our draft plan as the months unfold before the fall.
Terrific. Thank you so much. Bob?
We're very fortunate as school leaders in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts to have a commissioner who believes in listening to the field, believing in all stakeholders, getting groups together. So mirroring what has been said from the other previous states, much is the same in stakeholder groups, getting a lot of collaboration and people in the room to discuss. Most importantly, it's driven by the biology. It's driven by public health. It's driven by what is safe. We talk constantly as superintendents and follow-ups that our job is to mitigate COVID-19. We know that there's no 100% until there's a vaccine. So what do we do in mitigation? And the biology and the public health aspect is a main determinant in what we do. Parents and all of those on the outside want to say, well, we want kids back as soon as possible. We want them safe, and we want the answer 3 weeks ago. And we need to get this right and not fast. And so it's comforting to hear that other states are in the same boat with just trying to get this right now. And so the timeline for our state is also a week or so from now. We'll get preliminary recommendations that will give us a framework to work within, and then districts will work, we call them roundtables and by regions. You're so correct that each region has a different story, and each school type within that region has suburbans and urbans and regional districts and vocational schools. We have different methodologies of the way we deliver. So we not only are doing it by region or roundtable, but we're doing it by subgroups of districts as well. But we're going to be getting those preliminary directions from the state, which have been put together by all stakeholders, from our commissioner in a week or so. And then we've been told mid-July, we'll be getting more specifics to that. And again, what Jeff Riley's been telling us is we need to be nimble. We need to be agile, and we need to know that people are going to have to tolerate ambiguity. And that's hard in our job because people want a direct answer. They want to know, as I said 2 days ago, what we're doing in the future. And we don't know today what may happen in July. So we always have to be ahead of this, but being prepared for what might come next. So comforting to hear that a lot of the same is going on in neighboring states. And so we move forward.
Great, thank you. Frank?
Great, good morning, everyone, and thank you, fellow panelists, because a lot of the work in New Hampshire, I think, mirrors some of the things that are going on there. One of the aspects of this work is I refer to it as some sort of hurry up and wait. We're all aiming at something that's kind of ambiguous, right? So we all want the answer today. The problem is the circumstances on the ground are changing so quickly. Whatever you decide today may be obsolete in 4 weeks, and we just don't know the answer to that. So to your point, Bob, we're really trying to be as nimble as we possibly can. We're attacking this really at a state level as well as at a local level. So at the state level, we created a task force called START. It stands for School Transition Reopening, sorry, Dan, Redesign Task Force. It is comprised of about 60 different individuals across the spectrum of constituents, education experts and teachers and families and parents and medical community, and all different kinds of folks who are participating there in 6 individual work groups that are looking across instructional practices, technology, student wellness, operations for the schools as well. We also conducted a survey in our state to get feedback from our parents and our teachers and our school leaders. And we had an incredible response. So if anybody's interested in doing that work, I can tell you that people care deeply about the work that we're doing here. We had, and for a small state like New Hampshire, this is a big deal. We had 56,000 responses to our survey. So pretty much everyone in New Hampshire filled out a survey, I think. But it was good, and it's an important work. So that work continues on, and then as well, parallel to that, we've got our local districts who are also engaging locally with their communities and their constituencies and their folks on the ground in their different towns and communities to try and figure out what school might look like. Nobody's trying to like drive a stake in the ground and say we have the answer at this point in time, but by facilitating this conversation as we get clarity in terms of what September might look like, it's going to be a lot easier to move to some more definitive decisions. And so our START task force is going to have preliminary recommendations out for our governor, for the department, and for school leaders at the end of June. We've planned an update that will take place sometime in July, probably towards the end of July, as the circumstances begin to move a little bit in terms of what's happening there. And as we begin to narrow down on what is September going to look like here in New Hampshire for our students and our families.
Terrific. Thank you so much. And last but not least, Kristen.
Good morning. So as we plan to reopen, we have really tried to have a partnership between the Department of Education, the fields, the Department of Health in Rhode Island, and the governor's office, and our community mitigation team, so that the guidance and recommendations that we put out have all of those stakeholders working regularly together, so that we are really looking at possible reopening scenarios and guardrails for those scenarios that are driven with that public health and community mitigation lens that also mirror the governor's reopening Rhode Island plans. So last week we released a statewide school calendar. So all of our schools will follow the same school calendar for the year. And this Friday, our plan is to release public health and safety guidelines that will really be, again, kind of what those guardrails are for schools as they begin to plan for reopening. We will also be releasing our reopening template that our districts will fill out in order to kind of depict how they are meeting those health and safety guidelines. Just trying to think of what else to add that hasn't been said already. Also, I guess we have a point of contact structure where each of our LEAs in Rhode Island has been given one point of contact at the Department of Education, so we can really provide a lot of technical assistance to our LEAs as they plan, both when they were doing distance learning and now as they plan for reopening. And we have, along this process, similar to the other states, really tried to engage different regional stakeholder groups to continue to get concerns and feedback on all of our reopening guidelines.
Awesome. Thank you so much. So I just want to remind our participants that we have questions in the Q&A, and you can upvote or vote for those questions, the ones that you're most interested in us answering. We do have 3 or 4 questions we're going to ask the panelists, but then we'll try to take some questions from the audience. I know there's so many questions, and unfortunately we won't get to all of them, but we'll do our best. So I'd like to move on to our second question, and I'd like to start with Frank, if that's okay. What can you tell us about your plans at this point in time? How many different contingency plans are you working on? And then also, what supports will be available to help schools reopen in terms of guidance and documentation?
Great. So like Daniel, and I think like the other states, we're a local control state. So it's okay if it looks differently in different communities. You know, some of our communities have been very minimally affected by COVID-19, and others have had more severe problems, although truthfully, New Hampshire has escaped much of the problem across the state and some of the other folks or the other places, and we're happy about that. So we are planning for the inevitabilities of a full in-person. In September, our students can go back into the building, either without any type of mitigation, because we've reached that point, or with some safety precautions that are recommended by our health professionals in the state that are going to guide that information, to hybrid types of models that would accommodate either students or educators who may have some type of a pre-existing condition and need to be a little bit more cautious in that process, to full remote. And really the full remote, as we look at the circumstances on the ground today, is not really probably an urgent or an exigent type of a decision that we'd be deciding, as much as it is if there's some type of a surge that happens in the fall and it causes us to have to once again find ourselves in remote instruction. You know, this first time we did it and we pivoted, you know, in about 24 hours, I think everyone did that. We're trying to not have to do that again, or if we have to do it, that we can do it even better than we did the very first time. I think another aspect that we are considering is not just what it looks like to come back into that building, but to be prepared in terms of how do we respond in the event that we find ourselves in a circumstance of having a COVID case in a building, so that it doesn't cause more disruption, right? We want to be very deliberate about that, because it can be very unsettling for parents. It can be very unsettling for teachers if all of a sudden someone finds out that there's a COVID case in their building. And so we want everyone to know that we anticipate that that may happen, and that we have the right procedures and the protocols in place to be able to respond to that well. In terms of supporting our schools through this, whether it's in person, a hybrid, or a remote type of a model, we are looking at a statewide technology solution. It would be a learning management system type solution that is really an investment in technology that is will allow our schools, whether they're conducting instruction in person, in a hybrid model, or in a completely remote model, the same technology can be very effective in terms of the delivery of instruction and the support of students, families, and teachers in that process. So we don't know what's going to happen. So again, even the investments that we are making in supporting technology are investments that are very flexible in terms of how they can be deployed and how they can support our schools.
Great. A couple of follow-up questions that everyone is asking. Masks. People want to know if you're planning to ask students and teachers to wear masks. And then also, can parents keep students home if they don't feel safe sending them?
So I'll continue with that, or did you want to close that?
Would you mind?
Okay.
Yeah, would you mind answering it, and then we'll have the others.
No problem at all. So in terms of masks, we just don't know the answer to that yet, right? In other words, like today, there's a certain circumstance on the ground. We don't know what that looks like in September. And so it would be premature to drive a definitive decision there. What we need to do is plan for the inevitabilities if we have masks, if we don't have masks. If we do have masks, there are some important considerations that need to take place, particularly relative to our younger students and their even ability to effectively wear a mask. The emotional and the social emotional effect on students associated with masks, as well as for many of our IEP students, particularly students who have sensory issues where masks are not really an option for them. And so we would really have to just see how things develop and plan for flexibility in that process.
And what about parents keeping their kids home? Would parents have the choice to keep their kids home?
Yep, so I know that, again, we've not got any definitive types of decisions on something like that, but when we talk about a hybrid includes not only just kind of limited cohort sizes inside the building, but hybrid also includes the flexibility for families to make choices that make sense for their children, for their families. Again, we don't know, excuse me, the health circumstances of all of our families, whether it's our families or our teachers. And so if we can create some flexibility that accommodates that, I think we'll be in a better place.
Terrific. Thank you so much. Sorry didn't want to bombard you, but good to get those. Kristen, would you like to go next?
Sure. Very similar, Kristen from Rhode Island, very similar to what Frank mentioned. We are asking that districts all plan for the continuum from the kind of full in distance learning to the full in-person, likely with some continued community mitigation and school mitigation efforts and social distancing efforts in place. But we are asking that schools plan for those two ends of the continuum, as well as in the middle where we have either certain groups that come back first or our vulnerable population and our populations, and trying to plan kind of that middle hybrid approach as well. And again, similarly, we have not made a definitive decision about masks. There are lots and lots of things to consider. We have put it in our guidelines that even if we are full in person, that districts really need to think about plans for students who need to continue distance learning for a lot of reasons, not just parent choice, but if if they have to quarantine or they become ill, we want to make sure that if they are able, that the learning can continue for all of our students. Yeah, I think that's it.
That's great. Thank you. I mean, it sounds like for all of you, there's that component of the hybrid of having something that students would be able to do online, as well as what might be happening in the schools face to face. Bob, do you want to go next?
Sure. We are preparing for all three scenarios and the 6 or 7 others that show up in between those 3 scenarios. And it's really changing the face of probably what we're going to do moving forward. If you really think about it, we've found small pockets of students who have excelled in the distance learning. A child who's school phobic, anxious, and some are doing okay. And why mess with that if the family or the child is being successful? We know that families and others want their children to be fully involved and back in. So what we're going to do is locally, and this is through recommendations from the commissioner in the state, is probably sometime in July, send surveys locally to our community members and say, will you be planning on attending if we're back in a full measure? And some may say no. And that's their prerogative. So we need to be ready with the distance learning approach. Survey for transportation. If they give us limits on how many students can go on a bus, will students and families carpool as used to be when I was in school and going back in time? God forbid we walk both ways up a hill 3 miles to and from, but what will we do with transportation? The other piece with the 3 scenarios is staffing. What if there are personnel who say, I really feel uncomfortable. I have some medical situations or my age and coming back. So we're going to have to navigate that as well. And regarding the purchasing of PPE, the state has been very helpful. I had a team of administrators yesterday go to a state-run webinar about the bulk purchasing of PPE. So any way we can get PPE in our hands, whether it's through the state, whether it's at the local level, we're going to try and stock up because we've now been made aware of the unknown since March 13th, and we need to prepare for that. So hopefully I've gotten all those questions answered.
Great, thank you. Dan, and then Desi.
So I'll just add that as a state, we did a few things to help make the situations in remote hopefully better for our students and families through the course of the spring, that we hope will be able to be supportive if we do need to return to a remote situation in the fall or at some point next year. That included a great deal of connectivity work that we were able to secure devices and hotspots for families so that students were able to connect. As in the case with some of your states as well, we have some pretty remote places where there isn't really good cell service or even broadband. So that continues to be a challenge for us, but we did make some headway in that regard. We were also very pleased that we were able to secure a number of waivers from the U.S. Department of Agriculture so that our nutrition program was able to go quite in earnest. And I just want to take an opportunity to thank our both transportation and food service colleagues in our state, because they undertook a Herculean effort to make sure that our students and families had the nutritional support that they needed during this. And I think we'll be well positioned to be able to provide that if we need to going forward. And similarly, we are working on some remote learning curriculum materials. We put a call out for teachers who are interested in helping us to put these resources together, and had 400 teachers respond almost instantly, willing to help us out with that. So we're pleased to have that, as an option. Obviously in person is ideal, and then there are the various iterations that we see, but one of these options that we hope to be able to provide and are planning for and working on it as we speak are some online learning resources for students to be able to access starting in the fall. So those are some of the wraparound supports, not even getting into, the concerns we have and some of the activities that we've done to support social, emotional, mental health awareness, having some of that telehealth available for our families so that we're able to connect with kids, let alone whether they're learning or not, but just whether they're safe and well while they're at home has been important. So we've been able to do that. A lot of partnerships between our Department of Health and Human Services in regard to that, and mandated reporting, and some of the, again, activities that we can do, which have been more challenging since it's been remote. But I keep joking that I'm going to make a t-shirt that says, I'm glad we had this pandemic because I learned a lot. It's true in many ways, but there are many things I think that we kind of scratch our head and say, why did we do it that way in the past? And I think, we'll be able to be well prepared for lots of different iterations, again, in partnership with our school units for the fall and beyond.
Great. Desi?
Yes, Desi from Connecticut here. So a lot of things that were said are very similar to what we're doing. As we currently draft our plan, I do want to take a second to iterate. We can't do this in a silo. So we're having constant conversations with our Department of Public Health because as someone mentioned earlier, this is changing on a daily basis almost. I think about, as we're drafting guidance for reentry in the fall, I think about summer school. When we drafted summer school guidance, it was back in, April, when we were in Connecticut sort of at the height of the pandemic. And now looking at it, we're saying, okay, we would have done this differently, or we would have tweaked that. And so we're trying to be very mindful of where we are right now, because it's hard to predict where we'll be in 2 months. But we are in the process of drafting a plan that does include a contingency should we need to have schools go back out again. So that is in the works. In terms of supports, we've had a lot of things going on in the last couple of months. We've had some generous donations through philanthropy to provide devices to a number of our students. The governor has set up through his office a statewide connectivity task force that is moving forward to address the connectivity issue across Connecticut. Our State Education Resource Center, also known as CERC in Connecticut, has stepped up and offered to do bulk ordering for any and every district that is needed. And we've had a number of districts that have taken up on that offer so far. On the academic side, we're going to be rolling out what we're going to call the CT Learning Hub, which will be available to every parent, student, teacher in the state of Connecticut through our website at absolutely no cost. We'll have a number of new resources there for students and parents and families to access. We're also working on a partnership with our local CPTV to help push out some content across the state, trying to make things as accessible as possible for as many families and students and educators as we possibly can. So all of those are just some of the things that we're currently working on.
Great. One question that's coming through, Desi, maybe I can ask you for Connecticut. Are you providing guidance for public and private and independent schools, or is it just public schools?
Yeah, so I think there's going to be something to glean from our guidance for, frankly, everyone. I think when you look at publics and privates, even charters, there are unique situations to each one of those sectors, but I think there will be some guidance that all of those different entities can glean from what we put out. And anything beyond that, we will work with them to clarify once we release.
Any other thoughts from any of you about that, the working with private schools? Kristen, yeah.
So we have the point of contact structure that I mentioned earlier, where each of our LEAs has a single point of contact at the Department of Ed. We have included our charters in there as well. And we have regional meetings with the superintendents, and we have done the same thing with charters and independent schools as well, to try to continue to get both feedback, concerns, and give them the same type of guidance that we are offering up for our public schools as well.
Great, thanks, Frank.
So we had the same approach as Kristen in terms of we've integrated our publics or our privates in with all of our work that we've done. So on our task force, we've got private schools and charter schools and traditional public schools all represented. and supporting kind of moving towards decisions. Again, because our task force is going to be coming up with recommendations that then our school leaders are going to use to make definitive decisions.
Right, great. Okay. All right, Cam has a question for you.
Yes, hello everybody. Unfortunately, as you know, your districts are going to be asked to do more at a time when they're also facing pretty severe financial restrictions and budget restrictions. And so I guess we're going to ask each of you, how do you think that's going to affect their response? As a state, is there anything you're thinking about doing to provide additional help with the safety aspects of reopening and other ways in which districts can be preparing themselves, even at a time when they may have fewer resources? And why don't I start with Kristen?
So similar to, I think, Desi mentioned earlier, we have been very fortunate to have some pretty hefty donations from some of our local partners, and we have continued to maintain strong relationships with them to continue to provide support. So just as an example, we are working with the Rhode Island Foundation in partnership for Rhode Island to provide some structured supports for districts as they plan to reopen. So kind of facilitated planning sessions so that they can work together as they create their reopening plans. And I think just really trying to use some of the resources that we have across the state to continue to support our school leaders. We have started to look at some statewide purchasing and bids just to try to make things more accessible for districts as well, and just really think about how we are using the money that comes in federally to support our districts, knowing that similarly to what other states said, we have some districts that have been hit at much higher levels, and how do we adjust our support so that we are providing those that need more with more support.
Great, thank you. Frank?
I really want to hear Bob answer this question, but I'll give it my shot too. Because Bob's actually putting the budget together, and I appreciate that work, Bob, that you're doing, because you are in the hot seat on this one. But I mean, I think similar to Kristen, as a state, what we're trying to do really is to support, Bob and all of the superintendents and school leaders around the state with whatever resources we have to help them be successful. And that includes, financially. So I know here in the state, I know Desi talked about the internet, connectivity. New Hampshire is a state with good connectivity, but we just recently launched a program to put another $50 million into closing the gap for a bunch of our students, across the state, so that if we find ourselves in remote instruction, we have the ability to make sure that that digital divide doesn't cause disparity across the state. So we're working on that. We have been supporting our schools through the summer with PPE in terms of trying to provide services. Obviously they've got the ESSER funds in there, but we're also looking specifically at the fall, and we've got some specific programs in place relative to our students with IEPs and where the shortcomings may have happened for them, and how we might step in and support financially some compensatory services for those students, because we think that that is going to be a really important gap that we need to focus on and not let get away from us. So that's what we got.
Thank you. Bob?
So let me begin. And thank you, Frank. You're so right, and thank you for being have empathy for what we're dealing with. So as a practitioner at a local level, you have to compartmentalize. Our last school committee meeting of the fiscal year is tomorrow evening. We are trying to close out FY20 and then prepare for 21, as we are discussing today, and how to reopen or restart or whatever we want to term it. However, there are statutory requirements, and I guess I'll go back in time. Normally a budget process is linear. You develop it in October, November, December. You go through the wonderful process January through April or May of going to finance committee meetings and selectmen's meetings and meetings with mayors and getting your budget battered around a little bit. You come up with a figure, whatever that is, and in May, town meeting or your city council says yay or nay to that figure. And running parallel with that are your staffing decisions. And statutorily, those staffing decisions are in a collective bargaining agreement. They are in statute, and you have to follow them. What has been created here is we have to still do those staffing decisions by June 15th. We have to close out our fiscal year by June 30th. And yet we are being told, and we're supposed to be the experts with the answers. So people come to the local superintendent and say, you know, please tell us what our future is. And my answer is, I don't know. We are making statutory decisions on staffing in June, and are probably being told we won't get hard numbers or concrete on a budget until possibly August or September. Our town meeting told us they might hold it off until November, giving us a 1/12 budget. So we are planning for scenarios of the unknown of the educational program based on the unknown of the dollar figure. That's probably everywhere, but I just think that everyone needs to understand that, and not everyone on this panel, but everyone listening needs to understand that we don't have the answers either. And even meeting with legislators, we met with them recently and they said, we honestly don't know. We don't know what to put a hard number on a revenue figure can be. So what you have to do, and what we've decided to do, is we must prepare for worst case scenarios. We must make these staffing decisions, which, think about it, you've relied on your faculty and staff throughout this entire process. They've been amazing. They've been dedicated and hardworking and gotten the job done and gotten us to the finish line. And then we go ahead and say, well, we have to provide a non-renewal because that's what the collective bargaining agreement says. Our hope is that we bring people back and programs back once dollars start coming in from either the state, locally. You know, we have rainy day funds. It's done more than rain. From the federal level, maybe something can get back there. But here's the other last part. What we're going back to is not what we funded in the past. I think we've all clearly explained that. So do we now need distance learning teachers for those who choose that option? Do we need more transportation, less transportation, PPE costs that can be helped? So it's really, I'll end with this. I go to a local Cumberland Farms. I'm giving them the ad here today, and I'll get a coffee, and they'll say to me in the summer, which isn't the case anyway, but they perceive this. So how's your summer going? Are you getting some time to relax and rest a little bit? And I just always go with it and say, sure, it's fine. You know, they don't know. This summer is not going to be a summer. We've gone from March through June with 24/7 and Zooming and Zooming and Zooming. I foresee that July, August, and September, to get the plane to land safely when school starts, hopefully, is going to be just as fun. So it's going to be a wild ride, and it's an uncertain wild ride.
Thank you very much, Bob. That was helpful, enlightening. Obviously, there's an awful lot to still be determined. Desi?
Yeah, well said, Bob. So look, in Connecticut, when we think about budgets and we talk about money, inequities existed before COVID, and they were exacerbated because of COVID. And we came out very early on as an agency and said, now is not the time at the local level for cuts. In fact, it's the time for the opposite. This is the time to make an investment in education because, to an earlier point, we're not going back to what was there before. We know a lot of our students need SEL supports. We need more social workers. We need more put into education. And so we came out very strong early on as an agency making that case, and we continue to make that case with our stakeholders, our legislators. You know, we're very appreciative of the CARES Act funding, but that's not going to be anywhere near enough to address the issues that we have. And so we've put out our priorities, and these are on our COVID webpage, around what our priorities will be as an agency with our CARES funding. But we know at the local level, this is just not the time for cuts. We're pushing folks to really dig deep and do some soul searching here to begin to level a playing field in education in Connecticut.
Thank you, Desi. Dan?
So not much to add from what's already been said for Maine. We are in a similar situation. We were, I think, one of the earlier states that had our CARES Act funding, ESSER funding available to school units. So I know that they're in the process of applying for it and receiving those funds for reimbursement for the COVID-related expenses that they have. So that's one piece that I know that they're working on. Our legislature has been out of session since March for obvious reasons. And so, you know, when they'll return and what decisions they'll be able to make for next year, again, we're in a similar situation as many of you where we're not sure what next year's fiscal situation will be with specifics. We know that we're ending this year okay, but next year, and quite frankly, probably beyond, I don't think that this is something that will necessarily bounce back for a year. We'll have to continue the consideration for that. So even to the extent that some of our statutorily required budget processes for our school units were disrupted with the public hearings and budget meetings and so forth, and the governor was able to come up with some solutions to help people still be involved, but just not in the same way to have local budgets decided. Some will be during the summer, but it's all challenging in our state as well, just because of the uncertainty that lies.
Thank you, Dan. Now, just a word to the panel. We have just a little over 10 minutes. Time flies in these conversations, and I'm going to ask another question, and then if we have time after that, we'll try to get to some of the feedback we're receiving from the people that are on this call. So the question that I have for each of you is, as some of you have alluded to, not every student has been participating in remote learning, and in some districts the number is even greater, whether it's connectivity, whether it's family concerns or other issues. So as a state official, or in Bob's case as superintendent, do you have any thinking about that, any plans? Are you working with districts in some ways to try to bring students back up to where they might have fallen short this spring when school reopens in the fall? So I'll start with you, Dan.
Sure. So we know that there were students that weren't able to connect for a variety of different reasons. And though we don't have provisions necessarily for specifics or requirements or mandates for what our school units need to do or should do, we have heard and know that there are various plans. We did put out summer programming guidance for school units if they chose to have some sort of programming, whether that was ESY or all the different iterations of programming over the summer. Obviously there are restrictions based on still where we are with the virus, but in small groups it's probably possible to do some learning over the summer. But then when it comes to the fall, again, we've heard different ideas that superintendents are thinking about. From some of it includes returning to school in the fall with a couple of weeks of intervention rather than getting right back into new learning. A good amount of social emotional learning and mental health focus, returning students from potentially traumatic experiences that they had experienced. So there's lots of different iterations of what we're hearing people suggest, but it's not something that the state will be requiring or provisioning for any kind of intervention or gap learning at this point.
Thank you. Desi?
Yeah, similar to Dan. So we put out our sort of summer school guidance for districts that are holding summer school, but in talking with some of our superintendents, they are also planning for some of those similar things: extended day opportunities for kids, extended year opportunities, Saturday opportunities. So I think a number of our districts are thinking about how to approach that issue of the learning gap piece. I mentioned earlier, through our academic office, we'll be providing the CT Learning Hub, which will be another resource for our districts and our parents to be able to utilize beginning this summer when we roll that out. And so a number of things are happening at the local level in terms of planning for some of those learning gaps for students. And I also want to say, on the flip side to this, we've had some districts who have been able to to pivot to distance learning do it really well. And we've highlighted a number of those practices, again, through our COVID-19 webpage, where we've asked folks, look, what are some of the best practices? Because we know that a lot needs improving, but I also want to give credit to our educators and our teachers who have stepped up, and someone made the point earlier, in what literally was a 24-hour period, right? To be able to pivot to online opportunities for kids. And so we want to make sure that at the same time we're trying to address the inequities, we're highlighting the districts and the educators and the teachers and the principals and superintendents, and frankly, families and students who have really stepped up to address some of those issues. So very similar to what Dan said around what the future may look like for closing some of those gaps. The last thing I want to say here, George, is that I think it's important for us to caution jumping into testing as soon as the school year begins. I think that is sometimes a natural thing that people want to do, which is get them in and test them, get them in and get a baseline. And I think that we have to be mindful of over testing as soon as kids walk in the door. And I think we want to focus on high quality instruction with standards aligned materials and resources in the hands of teachers, as opposed to just start testing on day one to get a baseline. So I just want to put that out there, and we're going to flesh that out a little more as we develop our guidance, but I do want to put that out there. So thanks.
Thank you, Desi. Kristen?
So one of the things that we are asking is included in our LEA's reopening plans is their plan for both assessing and addressing learning gaps that we anticipate to be there. And it is one of the support sessions that will be offered for our district leaders. Our curriculum instruction and assessment team has been working really hard to try to put together different resources and supports for both assessing where students are, and then really looking at having strong, high quality curriculum and curriculum materials for when students return in both the scenario of in-person and distance learning. We are also exploring a statewide interim assessment system so that we can make sure that all of our districts have ways to assess students when it's appropriate to do so. So when we did a survey at the end of this school year to see where all of our districts were with their assessment systems, and we definitely had some gaps. So we are looking at a statewide way to really support all of our districts to make sure that they have ways to assess our student learning. And similar to what Desi said, just really making sure that the LEA plans and the supports that we provide LEAs account for the social and emotional health of both staff and students when they return, knowing the hardships that and just stress that everyone has had to endure during these times.
Thank you. Bob, because Frank likes to hear from you first, I'm going to call on you.
All right, Frank, I'll give you some softballs. So you were very helpful to me. Thank you. Couple quick things. We guaranteed semester 1, and we guaranteed trimester 1 and 2 at our secondary level semester 1 and the trimesters at the elementary level. We cannot know the guarantee of what happened in semester 2 and what happened in trimester 3. So we've gone through engagement, educational attainment. We've got data and assessment on where kids are on both of those avenues. And we are ready to try and go back to those who have been identified to give them the boost of semester 2 in a certain core content area that they may have been found to have been lacking, or that trimester 3 at the elementary level. So that's the terminology we're using. However, a dose of reality here is parents, families, and educators are exhausted. And to wave a magic wand and say that on June 22nd, this school year ends, and on July 8th, we're going to bring all of you back and run this wonderful program. To me, that's compliance and not engagement. And so it sounds great, and we need to start to do something like this. We're having a hard time finding people applying for summer programming who were normal teachers in the past who did it. And we're having a lot of parents saying, we need time to just get away. This has been exhausting on us. This has been different. So I think it behooves us to know, when do we have individuals in the seats, which we hope is in the fall, and then let's then give the boost to the identified students who need more. And I'm not against what we're doing in the summer and trying to do in the summer, but I think the reality is it sounds nice, but people are exhausted. And who's to say that the biology is going to allow us to do that as well? So when we have them there as a captive audience, let's go at it hard with those gaps for all, because there's definitely been an equity issue.
Frank?
Great, and I will jump right in because I know we're running short on time here. So what we are doing probably, I think, which is a little different than some of the other folks have talked about, is really leaning in with our educators. I often say that teachers are assessment, because nothing like a teacher working with a student to know where the kid is and what they understand and they don't understand. And so we're offering some programs for our teachers. Basically, we do a lot of work with Universal Design for Learning in the state, UDL. So we are offering statewide a program for all of our educators at state cost to become UDL certified. As well, we're putting together a specific series for educators to engage remotely if necessary in terms of formative assessment. How do you work with a student and kind of figure out where those learning gaps are? Because our expectation is that it's not going to be there's going to be learning gaps, but it's going to be very uneven across the population of students. So how do we really kind of get at a very granular level? And we think the best way to do that is working with our teachers and making sure that they're equipped and capable of identifying those and figuring out how to kind of lean in and help those individual students. We will be running an assessment in the fall. I do think we want some baseline. And so many of our schools have assessment systems. I won't name the brands here, but if not, we're offering a state level assessment tool for folks to be able to weigh in and use. And then the next thing that I don't want to lose is our special education students. Those are students that we are trying to engage over the summer. We are requiring everybody to address ESY with all of the students to just see, is there something that just didn't work in remote learning for some of those special needs students, as well as just really work through all of our IEPs and say, okay, where are we with this student and how are they doing relative to their educational goals? And is there something that we need to do to try and help close that gap? And then leaning in at a state level to help financially support some of that.
Awesome. All right. Well, we knew this would happen. Time just goes by, and we have so many questions in the Q&A in the chat. I want to assure you that we will take all of the questions that you have posed in the Q&A and the chat. We will be culling through those and possibly putting together future webinars. Someone had suggested in the chat webinar by state, which would be really interesting to have multiple voices from individual states coming on the webinar. So we are planning on continuing our webinars over the summer, maybe not every week, but having opportunities to continue to talk with folks both in the field as well as in positions of leadership like you are today. So we want to just thank all of our panelists. I wish we had time for a last word from all of you, but I think based on your responses, we know that how supportive you are of the students and the teachers in your states. There's lots of questions and not a lot of answers, but thank you for coming on today and giving us your best thoughts about where we are and where we're going. So I'll turn it back to Cam for a few words of wrap up, and really again want to thank all of our panelists for coming on today.
Thank you, Allison. And I too want to thank the panelists. I think that was very enlightening. I hope that you'll come back at some point in the future as we want to update people on what states are doing. And I want to thank all of the people out there for listening in and contributing your questions, sharing your thoughts with us today, peoples. And I thank you for being here. And my co-host, Allison Geary, take care and see you again soon, we hope. Bye-bye.